Good morning. My name is Deb McCaffrey. I'm from Frontier Security. Today we're going to be talking about Passback for this month's tips and tricks. For Passback, it is a feature that is in Frontier. It is accessible to all. You just need to program it in. We don't normally turn the flags on because not all clients use it. However, let's go through some of the principles of Passback. So Passback is where we've defined an area that we want to monitor who goes in and who goes out and make sure that we're not seeing them in a place they're not supposed to be. This helps control certain areas, such other people call it vault. So it's controlling who's in, who's out by seeing what's happening on both sides of that area. Typically used in parking garages, as I said, vaults. Property rooms for police departments will use a passback. So these are just some of the instances where they're used. Later on, we'll talk about two-person, and then when we start looking at the configuration of passback, we'll also talk about some macros that you can put based on the count of that facility. So with Passback, we have defined an outside area and then our more secure or where we want to keep track of people in and out. So once we've defined that, just basics of Passback, we do have Passback. Someone, if they swipe in, and then if they're in there and they swipe back out, that's fine. We're keeping track of who's in, who's out. That's acceptable. When we're looking at Passback, one way to get a violation is they swipe in, they're in the room. If we can set up a grace time of how long they need to be in that facility, and so if they're in there more than, say, 8 hours, then once they're in more than 8 hours, then they can swipe back out, and again, they're still within the bounds. With the time limit, that grace period, they could swipe in, and then as long as they're in that area for longer than the grace time, say 8 hours and 2 minutes, they could piggyback on the way out and not use that egress radio and still turn around, swipe right back in, and not get rejected. Some of the violations come when someone swipes in, they're in the area, they stay less than the grace time, piggyback out, and then if they try to swipe back in again, they're going to get rejected because they didn't meet one of the two criteria. They either didn't badge out or swipe out on that egress reader, or they weren't in there during that allotted time. More typically what happens, and this is what we're trying to prevent, is someone will swipe in, and once they swipe into that area, they then take their badge and hand it back to the person behind them, who then tries to swipe in. So what the system's truly looking for is they're trying to make sure that if they've already seen your badge go into this area and hasn't left that area, that you're not trying to get back in. So if the program thinks, if Frontier Access Control thinks you're already in that more secure area and your badge is on the outside, there's a problem, there's a conflict. So this is what it's truly looking for. Most common that happens with this, people who use it for parking garages, they have in on the gate arm going in, and on the exit, the gate arm, they have the egress reader. Typically what will happen, someone who has permission to park in that parking garage will go in, leave their credentials on top of the parking arm, drive through so their relative behind them can try to pick up their badge and swipe in to get a better parking, say in downtown Detroit, that it's safe parking at the hospital, so they try to park there all day. That's where you're going to get that passback violation because it's already seeing that that person's already in the facility. Now, there's also two-person. Up until R3, this was an optional feature and now comes with the product. And two-person, what that includes is it's saying you have to have two people. The secured area that you have here can have either 0 or 2 or more. You can't have one person in there. You always have to have a buddy. So what we can do with the two-person is two people, and it waits for the first person to swipe in. The second person has to swipe in right beside them. Then they're in that egress zone. They're in that secure file room. People can come and go all day long, so they can come in and go out. As long as the count is 2 or greater, you're fine. Once you get down to those two people, those two last people, you need both people to swipe out before it lets them out of that secure room. This is a buddy system. A lot of law offices will use this for a secure file room. Property rooms at police facilities will use this. We have seen this used at a nuclear power plant where they wanted two people in an area. And probably one of the more unique situations we had was there was a kind of a machine shop, and they didn't want the power to be able to get to any one of the pieces of equipment. So they didn't want people to be able to turn on a bandsaw or a table saw without a buddy in the room. So what we did was on that room we had an ingress and egress reader. And as soon as two people were in that room, we then created a relay that would allow power to all the equipment in the room. And that way we were able to make sure that at least two people were in there and it was a safety check. Are there any questions so far? I'm going to try to unmute people here to see if anybody has some questions before we go on. Anybody? Okay. Well, let's move on then. So how we set up Passback. Let's go over to Frontier. You start on System Setup. This is a multi-step process because we need to not only turn Passback on in the system, we need to identify what is a secure or kind of a general area versus a more secure area. We need to identify those labels. We then need to go over on the doors themselves, assign what door the ingress is going from, say, a non-secure into the more secure area. So I'm going to call that the property room versus the lobby. And then we have to define the egress reader on that door is going from the property room into the lobby. So we need to define what the door does and what reader on each part of that door does. So we have to make those definitions. Once we do that, we then need to go back into System Options and enable it. So we can set it up and not have it active. Once we have everything set up, we have it the way we want to, then we turn it on so people can start utilizing that Passback. Through Passback, there's a few other things we can do. When we maybe have pushed everybody out in a kind of a lockdown procedure, or there's say it's a chemical spill in the building, you've pushed everybody outside. Once it's all clear, people may not have had swiped out. They just went out the door. You need to be able to do a global reset to get everybody back. There are certain places you may need just to do a reset on a certain group of people, or you can do resets on a certain person. You take the parking garage. Somebody came in, swiped their badge, had to go back out really quickly, was able to kind of piggyback behind somebody and tried to swipe back in again. They're getting a Passback violation. At that point, you could reset just that one person. So we have a couple of those scenarios. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is macros, especially when we're talking about two badge, because we can set up macros based on those counts. So to begin this process, On a system setup window, under Edit, System Settings, and System Options, right on the General tab, there's this Passback control. Generally, none of these are checked. When we're first setting up Passback, all we want to do is enable control feature. This allows us the tabs and checkboxes through the system, enabling us to set everything up. Later, once we have all the things set that we want, we will come back and enable the checks. That starts the process to monitor people if they are using the ingress and the egress reader. Grace time. So if somebody's been in the property room or in that garage more than 8 hours, so this is minutes and hours, so we can have a longer time if need be. And also that global passback reset is also located in System Options. So to begin the process, all we're going to do is we're going to enable the control features. Under Edit, Access, and Access Setup, I don't want to save it yet. This is where our passback zones are. This is where we're defining the zone itself. So I just have a general. This is the general lobby. All I do is I name it, and that's all I have to do. You're just identifying. So we are talking about identifying that property room versus the lobby. So those would be our two zones, our secure zone and our non-secure zone. So if we want to say lobby, and save. I can put this on an enforcement schedule. I also identify if I have a certain subsystem, which subsystem I'm using. I'm going to put another one in here for property room. When we come back, once we've set everything up, we will also be able to see the population. I'll talk more about this section below. But that's after we set it up and we start utilizing that passback feature. So once we've identified our general area and our more secure location, we've saved it. Now we go over to hardware. This is where we identify which door or which reader is our ingress reader, where it's going to, where it's coming from. I'm going to bring up, so I have my lobby door. Go to Properties, and now I've got this Passback tab. I have to enable that Passback. The ingress reader zone you go into for the ingress. So I'm going into that property room. And then the egress zone, where am I going? I am going into the lobby. So you define where the in and out is. From here, it's violation code. These are set up for the defaults. So the default is the credential is in the zone. Remember I talked about that we had someone already in the zone. It's seeing that the credential is already in the zone. Why is it on the outside of the room trying to get back in? That's the general. That's the default. Credential not in the ingress zone. So sometimes you have multiples. You've kind of like a nesting table. You've put 3 or 4 zones within a zone within a zone. Think of maybe a nuclear power plant that we have one zone that we go into that's our general zone. We need to then badge into maybe a secure zone, but it's not somewhere where we have to suit up and wear protective gear. But we have another zone that we do need to have protective gear, or at least one of the monitors, radiation monitors on us. So that's another zone. And then you have the interior zone, which is more by the core. So you've got 4 different zones going on. that's when you would use something that credentials not in the egress zone. So you're seeing that it's not there, it's somewhere else, maybe somewhere else nested within that more secure area. So this is where you use that. Again, it's a very rare occasion. Default for this is the credential is in the egress zone. Violation behavior, how do you want to act? Do you want to reject the badge, reject that credential, and log the entry, or do you want to just log it anyway, allow them in, you run a report once a week, and then just go slap somebody's hand because they didn't do it right? So that's how you want to handle it. Again, the default for this is reject and log. If this is the egress reader, again, that violation of how you want that to act. So that's setting up. We set up on all the doors, the ingress and the egress. So once we've done that, we've identified who can do this. It's going to be everybody. We can go turn it on. So then we go back to our system settings, our system options, and we enable that. We enable the checks. Once we start enabling the checks, then we can watch people for those passback zones. And so people can be rejected. If they get rejected, it will say passback violation down at the bottom. Before I was talking about how we can reset. We have that global reset here, and this is for the person. We can reset it here. We can also reset it on their badge, that quick reference on that badging window. So if I go over my people window, and I'm on my credential tab, there we go. He doesn't have one. There's the reset passback. I was looking for a valid badge for him. There we go. So I can reset the passback on that badge. Going back to access and access setup, we're looking at our passback zones. As people come through, you can reset the count so you can see if people have come through. And I'm going to go back to that lobby. Oh, I have it set up on my other door. It's my other demo box. My apologies. But you can go through and you can do a recount for this. You can get the population, which will list the people that are there. For the people that are already in that zone, we can just reset their credential to reset the passback on their credential. That's how we do just a group of people. Again, the global is done over on the system options general tab, or you can do one off by the watch window or the credentials tab within people and credentials screen. I'm going to open up the lines really quickly here. And if anybody's got questions before I talk about the two-person. Any questions? Okay, let's move on then. When we have a two-person, this is where we start to validate that I need at least two people in, and two people going in from the lobby into that property room. I want to verify that this is a two-person on my system setup. Let's see if I've got another one of those open. I do. On my system setup, I want to enable that dual zone check, so I want to make sure that people are doing it. Again, set it up first, then enable the check so people can start using it. But once I've identified that this is a two-person zone. I want to make sure that 2 people are going in. So this is a two-person zone. I'll start watching that. But this is where we can start using macros based on the two-person zone. And we can have, which macros do we want to use? You can maybe turn on a camera. You may have an exterior light. So, maybe you have a security office. It's on a 2nd floor. It overlooks another building that by the end of the day, typically your officers have had to go through and done one last sweep, and there's a couple hard key locks they need to work with, and they do one last sweep, push everybody out, lock up the building for the night. You're finding your security guards are going over there 2 or 3 times a day in the evening to get that one last person out. If a light on the outside of the building is an exterior light, you can hook up to an output. What we could do is set up that building with a 2-person, and we're watching the in and out. So we could set up a macro for it that says when the count gets to 0, then turn on the light. Security officer can see that light from their 2nd story office. As soon as that light goes on, they know nobody's left in the building. They can then go down and do a shutdown. So that's a possibility. There's tons of possibilities. We've used these for counters. We worked with another company where they were finding a lot of theft when it came to some office equipment, and a few other things were leaving the building. They didn't really want to leave the building, so they wanted to do a bag check on the way out. And they had 4 turnstiles out in the lobby. And so what we did is we put a counter on those turnstiles, and as soon as a turnstile would get to 80, that turnstile would be in a locked position. The guard then could go over, do a back check. As soon as they accepted, it would reset, so the turnstile would back into normal secure and would start the counter all over again. So by putting in that macro, they're able to just stop random people and do bag checks. So there's many, many ways to use this based on zone count. It's using a counter and then putting a macro against that. So all you do is you pick your macro and then the occupant count, so if it's 30, and the condition, so if it's greater than or equals 30, and then you put it in. And that's your macro. And as soon as it gets to that count, it'll execute the macro. At this point, I'm going to open up everything for Q&A, and I am slowly unmuting everybody. So if you have any questions, go ahead and ask. You can always put something in the chat box or use the question box as well.
Hello, Deb. It's me, Ladislav from Košice.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm fine. I got a question, and we already discussed this maybe previously in a call. I just want to confirm that that basically it's possible to set up a macro on the zone count when I'm counting the number of people in the specific zone, let's say in the whole building, and when the zone occupancy goes down to 0, some action will be taken. It means a macro will turn on a light, for example, what will show the security officer that in that building basically everybody left. So now time is to check the building, you know, if really everybody left and basically everything is in a condition how it should be.
Yes.
So I think that should be possible, am I right?
Absolutely.
Okay, but basically those lights, let's say what needs to be turned on, will be on that side where is the system installed, am I right? I mean that those lights will have to be hardwired to the relay, you know, to the RDP or to the, I don't know if it's going to the RDP or to the
it needs to be wired to a relay to be able to turn it on or off, yes.
Yeah, because actually what we discussed was that basically, based on that macro, create an alarm. And I think we said that it's not possible.
It's not, so the trigger is a zone count versus an alarm.
Yeah, I know, but basically the result will not be turning on a light, but creating an alarm in front here. And I think we said that's not easy, not possible right now.
So it could create an alarm.
To trigger an alarm in the frontier, so
Right.
the dispatch in the frontier will see an alarm.
We should be able to do that. Because you can,
maybe
because you
okay,
can,
maybe it's possible somehow, some way to get around it. Okay.
yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, maybe just need to investigate a little bit further. Okay,
Yep.
then the other question what I got is in the previous version we got the 573. Over there I could run a zone occupancy report, but just with the counts. You know, so it was a one-page document, depending on how many zones you have set up. We got like 20 zones, and it was just showing the zone name and the number of occupants in the zone. Now the version what we got now, there's the R2. Over here I don't see this option. You think it's possible to get that one, or that was just eliminated in the newer version?
So we are going to do,
I think it's in the event reports. Yep.
zone occupancy.
And then zone occupancy. So in the past, if I wanted to get rain date from a zone name, yeah.
So I don't have
If I
it.
run this, okay, in the 573 version, when you go to the parameters again, we had a checkbox where we can pick, I think it was here, just counts, you know, that it was not giving me like, I got here 19,000 pages in the system, so it was not giving me actually each page, you know, and the information about the page, and then at the end of each basically zone, the final figure, but it was giving me all the names, you know. It got like a 75-page document, you know. So I wanted to have just one-page document where I have just each zone and how many people in the zone. And in 573 this was possible, but in the R2 I don't see this option.
Okay, let me look into that and see what I can do. And I have to check with somebody that's
Okay.
familiar with the reports between the two
Gotcha.
versions.
No problem. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Well, if there are no other questions, I thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or email the webinar at frontiersecurity.com. I get those too. And next month, we will be back at the first Wednesday at 10 a.m.